Hey everyone, this is Period Help Australia, and today I'm doing the fourth instalment of my How to Make Cloth Pads series. So far I've shown you how to make your pattern, how to choose the fabrics for the pads, and how to cut out the top, core and back. So I've got the top of the pad here, I've got the core, and I've got the back, all cut out according to the methods that I've shown you so far, and today I'm going to be sewing it together. Now this is a tutorial for when you're sewing it by machine. I may do a hand sewn pad video in the future, but this one is going to be about how to do it with a sewing machine because that's the main method that I use, and I find that stitches done on a sewing machine tend to be stronger, last longer and look neater. So if you have access to a sewing machine, I definitely recommend that over hand sewing pads. So the first step is to attach the top of the pad and the core of the pad together. Now the reason that you do this rather than just leaving the core sort of loose in the pad is to stop it from twisting around and getting all mangled up inside the pad. So it's really important to make sure that it's sewn down and sewn down well in a way that will stop it from twisting around. So for example, you couldn't just do a single stitch down the center because the sides could fold in like that, which obviously will make the pad very uncomfortable and unwearable in some cases. So what I like to do for my most basic of basic attaching stitches is I just do one row of stitching down that side and one row of stitching down that side. If you have a walking foot on your sewing machine, use it. It will really help the machine to be able to feed the fabric through, and thick fabrics can be a bit problematic on some sewing machines, so you're going to want to feed it through evenly. A walking foot will help with this, and it will stop any issues like the timing of your bobbin being thrown out, which can be really bad for your machine. So yeah, take good care of your machine when you're sewing pads. Make sure you clean it regularly, get rid of any dust bunnies, and if you have one or can afford one, get a walking foot. Also, if you're new to sewing, I recommend pinning your fabrics down. I don't pin them just because I find that it's a bit of a waste of time for me because I've done so many pads by now that I don't really need to pin, but definitely, especially if you're new to sewing overall, or even if you're just new to sewing with so many layers, pin, pin, pin. I would put pins down the center, maybe 4 down there, and that way you can sew up either side without having to take the pins out. Okay, so I've just switched cameras, and this one's not on a tripod, so sorry if everything's a bit shaky, but my other one just went flat. So I've just sewn the core on with 2 rows of straight stitching just down like that, and if it looks a bit thicker at the ends, that's because I back tacked, which is where you sew a little bit, you sew backwards, and then you sew down, and then you sew backwards and back up. And I've trimmed all my threads, and now the core is attached, and the next step is to attach this piece and this piece. Now you want the right sides of the fabric together, and the right side on this one is the one with the pattern, and on fleece it's a bit hard to tell, but this side sort of has bobbles, whereas this side is more flat and smooth. You'll know what I mean if you feel a piece of fleece. Like this side has more texture to it and this one is more flat, so you want the textured side of the fleece to go against the patterned side of the cotton, or you know, the 2 right sides together. It changes depending on what fabric you're using, but generally if there's a printed side, that's the right side. So I'm just going to pin on the wings, and that's not strictly necessary. You can pin more if you need it, pin less if you don't, and I'm going to sew around the pink line, which is where I traced my pattern. You need to make sure you leave a space open to turn the pad inside out, and it's best to do this on a straight edge with a relatively decent sized seam allowance. So I'm going to do it down on this edge from about there to about there. You don't want to do it right on a corner either, so just around about there. And so I'm going to sew down there, around, and just to there, and back tack at both those ends. You'll also see that for this step I'm not using my walking foot, I've put on my normal 1/4 inch sewing foot. That's just because sometimes the walking foot gets caught under this little flap here and it can be a bit problematic. So just for this step I switch back to this foot. Okay, now the top and the back are attached together. I've just sewn along that pink line. Because this is an iron out pen, I'm just going to iron over this quickly to get rid of the marks, but that's by no means a necessary step. It'll just wash out when you wash the pad anyway, no big deal. And then next, what we have to do is clip off all of the corners and excess fabric in the seam allowance. So that means cutting across there, 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 and there, to get rid of all of the corners so that when it's turned inside out, all of these corners will be gone and that'll make it look neater. And then any edges that are still quite wide, they'll also be trimmed to be a bit shorter. Okay, here's a little something that I really need to mention that I just forgot to. Do not iron your fleece with a really hot iron. Don't do it. I know it's tempting, but it will melt the polyester, which is really not good and it can completely ruin your pad. So what I do when I'm ironing out those lines, sorry about the cars if you can hear those, is I wait until the iron is only half warmed up and I just use it really quickly then, and then I turn it straight off. I don't want to melt my lovely fleece. Okay, so this is what it looks like completed. As you can see, on all the corners I've cut notches or cut the corners off, and even on these ones, yeah, cut a little slit in there. So the only edge that I've left with quite a bit of fabric is the one that has my turning gap on it, and that's for a reason. So now what I have to do is flip the pad inside out. Okay, so to do this, what you've got to do is get the pad at the turning gap and open that gap open. Then you stick your fingers inside that gap and sort of bunch it all up until you get to the very end. And then you push that out through the gap. Just shove all the fabric straight out like that. And you'll end up with something a bit like this. Then you just want to pull in and get the wings out. Like that. Poke out any bunched up corners. And what I do now is you need to sort of poke the corners out. I get a pair of scissors. You can use a chopstick or a pencil or something like that, just anything with a sort of point. And you put that in the turning gap and sort of stick it in the corners so that they get poked out. It just makes them look a lot neater and makes everything smoother to sew. Now if you have a curvy pad, you still need to clip it. You clip it around the curves and you do little snips every few centimetres all the way around. So if your pad had curves rather than straight edges, that's how you'd approach it. Alright, that's all of my corners poked out. And as you can see, it's nearly looking like a pad. Okay, so now we're up to the final step of sewing, and that is the top stitching. Now, top stitching typically goes all the way around the edge of a pad. It holds all the layers together, and it also closes up the turning gap. That's why you need to make sure you don't trim off too much of the seam allowance there, because all of those edges need to be caught under your sewing to make sure that it'll lay flat and secure and won't come undone. So I'm going to take that over to the machine. I'm putting my walking foot back on, and I think I'm going to do 1/8 of an inch. You can do 1/4 inch top stitching if you'd like. You can do it whatever width you want, as long as it's, you know, still going around the edges, and just stitch around the pad. And here we are now with the pad just about done. All that we've got to do is add some fastenings onto it, either snaps or buttons or something like that. But I'm going to cover all of that in a separate video, so you can look out for that in the future. But that is how you do the actual sewing aspect of the pad. Just remember to backstitch on where you started. I tend to start on the wing, so it just seems like a convenient place to start, but you can start anywhere on the pad. Pin your turning gap if you need it, but apart from that, that's just about everything that I've got to say to you. I hope you found this video useful. Please comment, rate and subscribe, and I will see you soon with another video. Bye!